I personally believe whatever's going on in your inner world is reflected in your outer world. So if you've got a lot of chaos inside, it's usually going to be reflected in your environment and vice versa.
Hi, welcome to the Tarun Stevenson Leadership Channel. I'm your host, Tarun Stevenson, and we are all about helping you lead, communicate, and grow to your full potential. Whether you're tuning in on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, or your favorite podcasting app, don't forget to subscribe and follow so that you can stay up to date with all our latest episodes. All right, here's the latest episode. Let's get into it.
Well, hey everybody, Tarun here, and I am with my guest today, Julie Corraccia, and she is a coach, author, and speaker who specializes in decluttering your life. So I think this is going to really help somebody today. Welcome to the show, Julie.
Hey, Tarun, thanks for having me.
No worries. So great to meet you. It seems like we've got a little bit of a delay, so I'll try and make sure that I don't talk over the top of you while you're talking today. You're coming in from the US, and I'm of course in Australia, so that always presents a slight challenge. But why don't you start by just introducing yourself? Tell us a little bit about you and how you got into the work of helping people declutter their life.
I was in a really horrible job. And I had been a nonprofit. I was a grant writer, fund development person. So I raised funds for nonprofits, which was a really great job. But I had moved from Los Angeles to North Carolina, started a job, and figured out very quickly, ooh, I don't know, this isn't happening. So I said, well, what can I do? I just don't want to go to my skill sets and that would support me in helping people. And so I came up with professional organizing. But then the more I did that work, I had this aha moment. I went to work with someone and she said, can we just talk? And I said, absolutely. You're the client. It's whatever you want. And in that moment, I realized it was more about clearing clutter than the organizing, because you want to dig deep, get down, and clear all that stuff out. And so that was kind of my aha moment, and where my focus began on clearing your clutter. And I do a lot of personal development work. And so kind of the parallel of doing that, working on myself, I thought this stuff's going to support my clients.
Great. So you said, when you say you started out as a professional organizer, what is a professional organizer? I mean, for anybody that's uninitiated, what would you do in that context?
Organize your garage, organize your office. And a large part of that is decluttering in the beginning, but sometimes people don't want to let anything go, and there's no right or wrong with that. And then you would just organize everything you had. So if someone says, hey, I can save you money on your insurance bill, you can say, fantastic. Let me locate that right away so we can figure that out.
Great. So you're helping people get their lives in order in a really tangible sense. I expect that part of that process is a little bit emotional. And so you're also coaching them emotionally through the process of letting go. You said some of the things they don't want to let go, but they need to do so to organize their lives.
Absolutely. Emotions are a huge part of it. And if you can also create emotional clutter. So sentimental objects are a great example. You have that antique dresser that you absolutely hate, but it was your great grandmother's and you don't want to let that go. So let's talk about that.
So how does,
one example.
So with emotional clutter, how does that necessarily impact somebody negatively? Like you mentioned, they're keeping things for sentimental value. Is there a negative result or a consequence of holding on to too many sentimental items? What does that do for a person emotionally?
Well, if you are surrounded by clutter, clutter can cause depression, and depression can cause clutter, and you can get involved in that cycle. It can make you really anxious. If you walk into your home and you have a bunch of things, you lose your peace of mind. If you have someone if you're in a relationship and they have a lot of clutter, that can cause fights. and
Right.
anger and frustrations in relationships. There's a bunch of stuff that can go on with that. And where we get confused is we put our memories onto objects. And
Yeah.
the antique dresser of your great grandmother, that doesn't represent your great grandmother. She's in your head and she's in your heart.
Mm,
So when you
mm.
have that aha moment, then you can say, you know what? If I let go of this antique dresser, I'm not saying goodbye to my grandmother. I'm
Yeah.
not saying, the memories are going to go away. And that's a lot of times where we get tripped up.
Yeah, right. No, that's fair enough. And so, what do you think it is that causes people to struggle with clutter? I know some people are better at organizing their lives than others, but what's the process that gets people into that, I guess, hoarding mentality or holding on to things?
I believe it's they get overwhelmed
Mm,
and they feel really stuck. So they don't know, what do I do first? And so they become paralyzed with fear. They're so overwhelmed, they can't even think, okay, I'll take this step and then this next step. So that's usually a large part behind it. Now, if someone is truly a hoarder, then
mm,
they're usually deeper psychological issues going on with that. So maybe they had, for example, trauma as a child. And so that has kept them stuck and able and unable to release things. So hoarding is definitely a more extreme.
yeah.
But, I personally believe whatever's going on in your inner world is reflected in your outer world. So
Okay.
if you've got a lot of chaos inside, it's
Yeah.
usually going to be reflected in your environment and vice versa.
Okay, that's really interesting. Now, I work in leadership and I work with leaders who can sometimes appear to be disorganized on the outside. Maybe their desk is somewhat messy. I know that that's my way of working, but that seems to work for them. And it doesn't necessarily seem to have a negative impact on their ability to work at a very high level. What's your take on people who perhaps work in a less organized fashion, but it seems to work for them?
I would challenge them on that
Okay.
because what I'm going to say is, well, first of all, if you look at statistics, I know this is in the US, I'm not sure about Australia, but it's something like 79% of people, if they see a coworker's desk is messy,
Mm,
they don't trust them as much. They think they tend to be lazy. First of all, there's a negative
yeah.
connotation that brings up. And I will argue that you're less creative and you can say, "Oh no, Julie, I've got it all under control." It clutters your mind.
Mm,
And I would say give it a shot. Clean up your desk and see and give it a week or two and see if you're mentally more clear. And I think also creative people
mm.
tend to think this way as well. Well, if I remove the clutter, then my creativity is going to go. And I don't believe that to be the case.
Okay, so talk more about creative people because I have creative people around me in a lot of what I do, and I've heard that before. I know I've probably used that excuse myself before. What is it about creative people that seems to like the chaos? If you or they seem to think that the chaos helps them with their creativity.
Because I just think creative people in general tend to be a certain personality, and that's a plus. I consider
Mm,
myself creative. And I think that sometimes they get locked in this misconception that I've got to have the chaos around me in order to create, because that brings in ideas or feelings or
mm,
sensations. When, as a writer, that's what my creativity is. And an example I would use is great. You know how you have, like, actually right behind you in
yeah.
a smaller version of mail. Like if I was a writer, I'd have all my projects. Like if you're write your scrap paper, you have an idea, then
Mm,
just organize it and declutter it a little bit. But I think
great.
mentally, you can definitely create more. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, by decluttering your external life, you're really giving yourself more mental space, more mental capacity to think through problems, to face challenges in a more orderly fashion. I mean, that makes complete sense because when your mind is clear, you can actually problem solve far more effectively. And you've mentioned the stress that it causes other people. Um, I am married to a lady who is very organized and loves organizing everyone around her. Now, that's her thing. She's very gifted. And sometimes those, those opposites of me being less organized and her being very organized can cause some, strain. So what do you say for people who are perhaps very organized and they have to live with or they have to work with somebody who's disorganized? How can they help themselves first, but then also help the other person to become more organized?
It's a balance.
Yeah.
And if you're super organized, well, first I'd say to your wife, start your business, become a professional organizer if
There
you
you
like
go.
it so much. And if she does it all day, then maybe she won't come home and want to do it. But the
Yeah.
first thing I'd say is be less rigid,
Right.
right? And so what I would say is have compromise. There's certain areas like her office, let her do her thing, and that she
Hmm.
should give you more leeway in your office. And if you have kids, give them little more leeway in the bedrooms than you would in the common room.
Right.
And
Yeah.
and encourage you to come up with rules together.
Mm.
And like if you're a complete slob, let's raise you a little bit. And if she's super uptight about it, let's bring her down a little bit, because
Hmm.
no one wants to live in a home that's super organized, that you feel like you can't sit on the couch and relax.
Sure.
There's got to be some fun and to be able to relax and have
Yeah.
peace of mind. And so I think
Yeah.
that's really important. So it's about finding a balance. And then what I would say to your wife is have her say to you, what has your disorganization cost you? Have
Yeah.
you been stressed out? Have we lost money because you didn't pay a bill on time?
Mm.
And then ask you what would motivate you to do that. And then to work with you non-judgmentally and say, we're a team, we're going to
Yeah.
problem solve, and let's do this.
Great, great. And look, we've got 3 teenage sons and a teenage daughter. And so, that finding that balance between the excessively rigid, orderly house and giving leeway for them has been part of the process. We recognize that as teenagers sometimes they're going to take time to become a little bit more orderly, and so sometimes it's better to just close the door than to try and stress too
Yes.
much about what's going on. So that's great advice, and I think that applies to workplaces and businesses as well. Now, you started out as a personal organizer. Tell us about the process that you went through, realizing that there was more to this decluttering than just the physical space, that it was about emotional space. It was about your relationships. It was about your thinking patterns and habits. And really that's something you have a tagline behind you on that, your little logo. It says, clear your clutter and create the life you choose, deserve, and desire. And so you've really tied the whole idea of clutter to the way people experience their life as they move through it. So tell us about that process for you and what got you to there.
Well, prior to when I first started my business, it was called Healing Through Organization, because I
Mm.
wanted to do something that really made a difference. So that I mentioned earlier about the woman who's like, I just want to talk, let's kind of go through things. But ever since the beginning of my business, people would talk to me. And
Yeah.
so I was coaching naturally, even though I couldn't have described it. And why I'm starting my business and doing this, I'm also doing an international internet TV show called Reawaken Your Brilliance, where I would interview body, mind, spirit experts. And so I'm getting this training, I'm working with a coach. And so kind of all these things are coming together. And it was that aha moment. The more I worked with people, wow, there's an emotional component. Or, for example, spiritual clutter, which I
Yeah.
would say not forgiving is,
Yeah.
and not being able to forgive is spiritual
Great.
clutter, and how that
Great.
created blocks for people. And so it was like, well, if we work a little bit on the inside, do some coaching, our physical environment is getting a little more clear. And so it was kind of all these things merging together that I'm like, this is what my focus needs to be on. Because when you clear that clutter, like that's what my tagline is, you can create the life you desire. If you're in clutter and stuck, you're
Yeah.
not happy and you're not doing what you love.
Yeah. So good. So good. I love that you mentioned forgiveness because that's such a powerful blocker for people who want to move forward or to improve their life in any way. Talk to me about the process that you encourage your clients to go on when they're trying to declutter emotionally, because that's a hard one. Often our emotional clutter has built up over a long period of time. There are multiple events or experiences that have contributed to it. What's the process that you guide your clients through to help them declutter emotionally?
Well, one of the first things I say when all else fails, breathe.
Mm,
If you're angry, you're upset, just let's center ourselves. Let's take a moment and breathe because the present moment is your point of power to change. So I know if that happened in the past or we're anxious about the future, let's become present
mm,
because when we have those deep breaths, we can think clearly. And then it's about checking in with yourself. What are you feeling in this moment? What do you need in this moment to bring you back to center? And then understanding that it's layers. You're just not going to wake up and everything's going to disappear. And so you'll have times that you'll work through things and then maybe you slide back, but you still stay on it and work and continue to move forward. Is this making
mm.
sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And doing things, so say you're really angry about something and you feel wrong. Let's say you have a
Mm,
sense of injustice about something. So you breathe, you become present. And if you're like, you know what, I'm just still up here, what can you be grateful for? Tell me something right now that you have gratitude for. Because you can't have two opposing thoughts. I can't be really angry about the injustice that happened and be
mm,
in gratitude. So if I bring myself in gratitude, and again,
mm,
that just raises your spirit, it raises your vibration. So taking a little step like that. And if you start to have gratitude, then you can start to work on forgiveness or
mm.
finding your passion or whatever it is. It's just taking baby steps and starting where you are.
Great. Great. That's such good advice. And, something that I talk about a lot with goal setting is you've got to start with the next step that is doable for you. You've got to really, like you said, take baby steps. Start where you are. Don't try and do everything all at once. That's such good advice there. So, Julie, tell us about this process that you've been on, or this journey you've been on. So you've now, I guess, moved into more coaching. You say coaching inside and out. And how are you seeing this in the context of business? I mean, obviously, a lot of my followers are leaders and they work in either they run their own business or they're in the corporate environment. How does this process of decluttering, both physically and emotionally, help those who are in business? What are some tips that you can give leaders for declutter? And could I extend it maybe to, can you declutter teams? Can a team become cluttered if you're leading multiple people? What are the barriers that may build up over time when leading people, do you think?
Oh, I love that question. That's fascinating. I would say an example would be resentment.
Mm,
In a team situation in a business world.
right.
I'm resentful that Joey gets more recognition than I do, or why did Antonio get a raise? They're all things. That's
Mm,
something just off the top of my head that I think would happen a lot. Or there could be burnout,
mm,
that someone is being overloaded. And so I think the concept of decluttering a team would be great. And so you have to have open and honest conversation. Now, physically, I would say if you're a leader, you should have a decluttered office.
yeah,
Remember, you are setting the tone for your business, for your office, and you should be an example, in my view. And then I think it would be great. Like, what's your mental clutter? What's causing you anxiety at work? And, if it's whether it's having something like Calm, the
yeah,
app on your phone or something, or taking 5 minutes of deep breathing or 5 minutes throughout the day to get centered and close your eyes. I think that that's really important because,
great.
especially if you've got a lot going on and you have many things that you're juggling, the more clarity you have, the
Mm,
more that you can be neutral and non-emotional about things, the more successful you're going to be. If you
great.
are going to fly off at an employee that makes a mistake,
Mm,
which I prefer to call those lessons learned, you don't do anyone good.
yeah. So good. So, I mean, you're describing here something that I do a lot of work around, working with difficult people and managing your own emotions and how that impacts the people that you lead. Can you unpack that a little bit more? Just for you use the example of flying off the handle or getting angry at somebody. Anger can really stem from unrealized expectations or unmet expectations a lot of the time. And I can see as you're talking how emotional clutter can really create that sort of anxious and or angry tension in people. What are some of the ideas that you would give leaders to actually start dealing with an angry disposition, or if they have a tendency to just be reactive? How can they declutter to start addressing that?
I would take it a layer deeper.
Hmm.
And I believe it comes from fear. What are
Yeah.
you
Okay.
afraid about? That angry knee jerk reaction is we're not going to get the client, or we'll lose the
Yeah.
client, or we're going to not meet our deadline, or whatever it is that we're working on. So
Hmm.
then you can dial it back. Okay, I'm afraid this is going to happen. What can I put in place? I have expectations. I create a timeline. The client starts January 10th, and let's plan it out to March 10th when everything is due. And so if you set those things in place, and you're going to check in, all right, team, we have a check in every week or every 2 weeks. And then that way you're managing it. So not all of a sudden it's sprung on you. And that's what creates the volcano eruption. So
Yeah.
you put different things in place to manage that. And at the same time, I would say that's more what I'd call the physical clutter. How can you manage the emotions?
Yeah.
Your anger sometimes, not always, is about something maybe deeper. Like if
Yeah.
you in a past job had an employee that cost you money or cost you whatever, or even it can go back to childhood and remind you something. So it's
Yeah.
like boom, in that moment you're taken there and then you're off at 90 miles an hour,
Mm.
not even aware. So I'm all about how can I become more aware? What is it about? Because
It's
what
great.
other people do has zero to do with me. It's how
Yeah.
I respond that I want to focus on. Okay, that employee might have made a mistake, but what is it about me that I need to learn to grow?
Yeah. So good. So good. And, just what you're saying there about having an awareness of how experiences can trigger past memories. And I remember once sitting with my counselor a number of years ago, and I was under an incredible amount of stress from my work. And he asked me the question, he said, "Who are you trying to impress?"
Mhm. Yeah.
And it was a real one of those stop yourself in your tracks moment, because it just sort of, I thought, that's a really interesting question. And as I delved deeper, I realized that I wasn't driven by necessarily the people that I worked with. I was being driven by relationships
Mhm.
with my father, and
Mhm. Mhm.
experiences from my childhood that I was trying to prove people wrong who had written me off or had said that I couldn't
Mhm.
be who I wanted to be. And, so many of us are driven by these unspoken or even unrecognized experiences and relationships from our past that can cause that tension and stress. So it's so good that you mentioned that. Well, I want to go a little bit deeper with the whole decluttering of emotion and dealing with the past, because I think that is such a powerful driver for people. I mean, so
Mhm.
much of what we do personality wise and behavior wise is tied to the way we were raised and our early
Mhm.
childhood experiences. Sometimes it's difficult to put your finger on your early experiences. Until you have those aha moments where you start to go backwards and you start to say, okay, now I see what's going on. What's a process that you think we could go through to actually start to uncover some of the more hidden experiences of our early life that may be contributing to the stress or the clutter that we're processing at the moment?
Well, remember their layers. And
Mm,
one thing I want to say is you don't always have to get to the root of the story,
yeah.
because a story is something we can get distracted on. Oh, my father or my
Mm,
neighbor said
mm,
I was ugly and fat and blah, 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 blah. And that's
sure.
why I feel unattractive or whatever it is. So if you need to, that's
Yeah.
okay. But it's more like, if you can't get to the story or remember that moment, how am I feeling in the moment?
Yeah.
What is this bringing up to me? And then going back and with the emotions.
Mm.
And usually we're either coming from love or we're coming from fear. And what I've found
Yeah.
is I would articulate it as we feel not good enough, not worthy enough, or not loved.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
usually when we're coming from something stressful for that. And so realizing, okay, maybe I can't remember the story, but this is what I'm feeling right now. And just think on that. And
Mm.
then I like to dialogue. Well,
Mm.
that's not true. I'm lovable. My husband loves me.
Mm.
My parents love me, my cats love me, and so, that's a place from a false ego has told you this story and this tape that keeps running in your
Mm.
head. So it's about stopping the tape in the moment, saying that's not true. And
Yeah.
then I think it's important to replace that with something positive, whether it's I am loved, I am worthy, I am good enough.
Great. Great. So, is there a process? Do you advocate, like, say, journaling or some kind of process to start to have that conversation? Because it's not always possible to have the conversation with somebody else, although that can be very helpful. Is there a process that you advocate for of having that conversation, perhaps with yourself? And how would you do it in a healthy way?
Well, first of all, I'm glad that you brought up because you can't always have those conversations. Because if someone's dead, it
Yeah.
doesn't do you any good to be angry for 20 or 30 years or keep
No.
playing that over and over again. I'm a huge fan of journaling. I created a
Mm.
journal prompt series because you have the wisdom within. And when I
Yeah.
work with someone, they know what's best for them. It's my job
Great.
to support them and bring it forward. I am a huge fan of journaling. You can talk to someone if you're like, you know
Mm.
what, I don't even know where to start. And they can be a mirror back to you to help
Mm.
with that. But it's about finding that quiet time. And if you're like, I can't even journal, just start writing
Mm.
and see what comes out of your head. You never know. Or if you're in that moment and you can stop and take that deep breath and, videotape it or start the audio thing. I'm feeling whatever, whatever, and just see where your thoughts go
Yeah.
and where it takes you. And the thing we get in the habit of is censoring. Oh, I
Mm.
shouldn't feel guilty. Oops, I can't believe I said that about someone. Right. And then we do that instead
Yeah.
of like just letting it out and see where it goes.
Yeah, it's good. Now you mentioned video, and I've noticed on social media there's probably a increasing trend of people using social media to um, get out their emotions or about their experiences, whether they're small daily experiences or big ideological experiences. Is I find sometimes the videos that are posted are perhaps less helpful
Mhm.
to the person. It seems like they're looking for somebody to affirm what they already believe rather than trying to process a healthy way of moving forward from it. Is there a place for doing this privately versus doing it publicly? I mean, what's your thoughts on that sort of process?
I agree with you. First, I think they are looking for validation.
Yeah.
And the challenge with social media, now, if you're surrounded by everyone who thinks like you and acts like you, no problem. But the reality
Yeah.
is that's probably not the case. So you're opening yourself up to be vulnerable. And I think
Yeah.
definitely with some people, I've experienced in some groups, people like just complain all the time and they never
Mm.
take any action. And I just want to say, just do something because all you do is complain. But I'll give an
Mm.
example where I thought it was helpful because one thing is I'm not perfect and I
Mm.
share where I stumble. So I took a break from Facebook, gosh, probably a couple months ago because someone I've known since I was a kid got all angry on my Facebook page. And I'm like, dude, we haven't talked in years. What are y'all coming and just screaming at me?
Mm.
And the next day I wrote and I said, I'm taking a break from Facebook because when someone who's obviously in so much pain because they have so much anger misdirected at me, I said, and I can't muster any compassion. I brought it back to me, right? Because it's
Mm.
about how do I need to be a better Julie? And
Mm.
so I said, then that's a signal for me to take a break. So then
Mm.
I did a little video the next day that I shared on Instagram and I said, so this happened. And then I shared an email that I got the very next day, which was when I said, and this affirmed that I was definitely taking the right step to take a break from Facebook. And so I use that as a teachable moment. And I
Yeah.
found in something, but then, I was saying, look, I can't muster any compassion. And
Sure.
so, showing people as a tool, I think that way it's very helpful. But I think you hit on most people just want to rant and rave. There's
Mm.
no
Mm.
self-awareness, there's no how can I be better, and I think that's where the difference lies.
Yeah, so good. And I think that there's been a lot of benefit in us being able to connect with people through social media and through the internet. But, like you say, without restraint, it can be just self-validation, and it never becomes that teachable moment that we all need to be able to move forward. Um, Now, you mentioned that you've got a journal prompt uh, guide. Tell us a little bit about that and how it can help us.
Oh, I just would like to say video can also be a tool for you to
Yeah,
record yourself because you might
great.
not realize how you look and there are all those little cues. So that's
Yeah,
something you can do a private Zoom session or whatever. So I just
good,
wanted to share that.
good one.
So I created a journal prompt series
Mm,
because we all have the wisdom within. And so it concentrates, you can look at physical clutter, mental, emotional, spiritual, holiday. I have a compilation. I now have health, finance, relationships, and energetic clutter because I'm a big
okay.
believer in that. And so what I do with the journal prompts is teach you, give you examples, and then you have 365 journal prompts, and then how do you move forward? So I teach you how to set a goal, how to do that, because I want you to take action. Because if you just write everything down
Mm,
and you never do anything, then it doesn't make it different. Well, the other thing that I did, because people who have clutter tend to be really overwhelmed, is I have a little lotus on the side. And so you write out your answers. And then if you need to, you take an additional step. What was really important out of everything that I answered in this question? Because
mm,
sometimes we just got to rah, 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 and get it on the page. But what was significant? Oh, if I pull that out, and again, that's less overwhelming because you're breaking it down into smaller steps. So
yeah,
I want to live in a world where everyone's sharing their gifts and excited and passionate. And so that's one way that people who, if you're motivated, you can absolutely do it on your own.
great. And we can access those journals from your website. Is that correct?
We can on the website and Amazon. I don't want to be on
And Amazon.
Amazon, but it's life right
That's
now.
life right now. And that's
Mhm.
we'll link to that, but it's reawakenyourbrilliance.com is Julie's website there. Now, I heard you say mention energetic clutter. Tell me what that is, because I'm intrigued.
Everything's energy, whether you
Yeah,
believe that from a physics perspective or
yep,
a spiritual perspective.
sure.
So, what is the energy that you're putting out there?
Mm,
I would give the example. So I'm in the South here in America, and they could say, bless your heart.
mm,
They're not really blessed. They're saying you're an idiot. And
mhm.
the tagline that they use is bless your heart, but you feel the energy
Yeah,
behind those words. You know someone's throwing something at you.
yeah.
So what it like your energetic clutter. Like think about a space that's super cluttered and then you go into a space that doesn't have clutter. You can literally feel the difference.
Mm,
So that's about what is the clutter in my aura, in my space. And if you're a fan of feng shui or understand that, that's all about the energy of the home or the
mm,
office. And the
mm.
first thing they say is clear your clutter. So it's
Right.
looking, what clutter have I created spiritually? Is it still hanging around energetically? Because even
Mm,
if you think you've been done with something and if you haven't, like if you haven't let go of your anger about something, it's
mm.
still there in your field. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. So you've got to the energy you're putting out really it impacts other people, but you also get impacted by the energy of other people. I love
Mhm.
talking about the way that our brains match emotion. We will match the emotion or the level of emotion that another person puts out, and vice versa. And so, being able to control the environment or the mood by not just falling into matching someone's emotion, but you actually set the tone for that relationship. It's very powerful stuff.
Oh yeah, I think that that's definitely is huge, and I love how you phrase that because if you raise your vibration, people will either rise to meet you or they'll go away, and I see
Mm,
it happen all the time. And so that's why I'm like, how can I raise my energy? I don't like
yeah,
where we are. Okay, let's raise our energy and let's move forward. Let's up and out. Let's get
yeah.
going.
Nah, so good. I love it. Now you've authored a couple of books as well, Julie. Why don't you tell us about your books?
Well, I have the 12 journal prompt series.
Yep.
And then I also have a book called Clear Your Clutter Inside and Out. And so that's a little more detailed. It's 21 chapters on clearing physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual Clutter. And I also threw in a bonus chapter on energetic clutter because I know it might be a weird concept for
Great.
people. And so that's again the same thing. I use examples of from my life, from clients, and how they've able to clear clutter, and then give you take action and how to move forward and step by step. Oh, how can I release this physical clutter? Or how can I work on jealousy? And have 21 chapters on that. And then an accompanying workbook if you want something to guide you throughout the book.
It's fantastic. Sounds good. And we're going to link to that, of course, on your website. And you've got a podcast. Is that podcast and a YouTube channel? Is that podcast available, say, through the normal podcast channels, or it is a syndicated radio show? What's the process there?
You can find me on YouTube or anywhere you listen to podcasts, and it's Clear Your Clutter Inside and Out. So it's
Great.
available free, something I want to do to give back.
Yeah, I love it. So good, Julie. I want to wrap up this conversation with some really practical steps for everybody that's been listening, because as you said earlier, we need to take baby steps. We need to start somewhere. So for all of us that are struggling with clutter, whether it's emotional or physical, let's talk about some really practical ways that we can start to take the next step. I mean, we've talked about a lot of ideas here. Now, for the person that's struggling with keeping their physical space decluttered, maybe just keeping their desk clean, what are some practical steps they can go on to start to change that habit and to declutter their physical spaces?
Well, one thing you can take the time, if, for example, with your desk, is at the end of the week or the end of the day, declutter. Put all the files back, put the pens back in their holders, straighten up all your books. If you get into that habit of decluttering, that's something that's really important.
Great.
And also, I would encourage people to, I'm looking around my office to see if I have any more suggestions. One is to get into the habit of decluttering. If you have other physical clutter, ask yourself if you're like, wow, Julie, I'm overwhelmed. Do you have a deadline? For example, you are getting shelving installed in the garage. And if it's on February 10th, I think I need to declutter the garage before then. Or if you're not paying your mortgage on time, then the priority is getting the office and the bills decluttered and organized. So ask yourself, is there a deadline? Is there something that's a priority that's really important? And then break it down into manageable steps. Like as I look around my office, I believe in decluttering everything you own annually. And if you are overwhelmed right now, once you've done everything, then get into that habit. But okay, I'll work on the bookcase today. If a bookcase overwhelms you, I'm going to declutter one shelf. But if you do 5 minutes a day, at the end of the year, you spent over 60 hours decluttering. So 5 minutes a day does matter, or 10 minutes a day, I believe that is. But if you just take a few minutes each day and set that habit and set that tone, and the more you do it, the easier it becomes.
Yeah, that's such good advice, because I think a lot of the challenge for people who struggle to get declutter happening is they see the mess or they see the project and they say, oh, it's too much. I haven't got time to do it today. But what you're saying is don't have to do it all today. You can start today, do a couple of minutes, and then come back to it tomorrow and just make it a daily habit that you come back to. That's such good advice. So what about, sorry, go on. Go for it.
I was just going to add, because you brought it up, when people, oh, I don't have time, because that's a big excuse. How much time have you spent on social media today? Social media is such a time waster and a time sucker. And I always want people to challenge, time yourself. If you don't have a realistic idea, because that time that you're surfing Facebook or doing whatever, you could get a lot done in that time. So I'm going to challenge your listeners.
Yeah, so true. And look, really, we have no excuse now, because most phones give you a breakdown of how much time you've spent on your phone. I was alarmed to get the notification on my iPhone today that my screen time has gone up by 120% in the last week. So I'm like, oh, too much time on my phone. I need to stop. But no, that's good advice. And we have to constantly challenge ourselves, because even with Netflix and those kind of streaming platforms as well, it's very easy to just lose 4 hours binge watching something. And to be able to set end times or stop times. Tell me, I don't know if you've ever considered this, but something that's really been playing in my mind about time wasting is the way that social media companies have designed their news feeds is they have this thing called the endless scroll, where you can continually scroll and you never get to the end of it. And they know that psychologically, if your brain doesn't have an endpoint, it never looks for an exit. And so creating endpoints with things, even with, say, watching now with Netflix, as soon as you finish a show, it says the next show starts in 10 seconds. So you don't have an opportunity to have an exit strategy. You just sit there and you just keep on going. What might be a plan for creating exit strategies in a world where technology has hijacked our ability to stop at reasonable times?
I think that's a great question. First, I would encourage everyone to see The Social Dilemma. If they haven't, that is a fascinating documentary, and that might be one thing to put you on pause and to really rethink things. So that's where you have to be disciplined. That's where you have to say, okay, you know what? I'm going to allow myself this window of time to do that. And unplugging does our brain good. We're so plugged in, we're so wired. Take a walk every day. Hug your kid, hug a tree, whatever it is. And so self-awareness is the first step to that, and having the discipline. And then you have to find out something that helps you. Like, for instance, I got a health watch and that says, ding, 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 let's get up. How long have we been sitting? How many steps are we doing a day? Because I'm a very disciplined person. Well, not so much, because when it comes to eating and exercising, and this year, that's my big goal. I joined Noom because Noom and my health watch keep me accountable. So what is it? Like you mentioned your iPhone, then 120, whoa, 120%. So what is it, as I plan my week, that I'm going to make sure that I'm not off on my phone? Do I need a reminder, on my watch, get off your iPad or whatever it is? And so you figure out what can support you in becoming more accountable and then do it.
So good. That's so good. We've talked about physical clutter. We've talked about starting to manage your calendar or your time frames. Let's talk about some easy steps for somebody that wants to start delving into emotional clutter. We talked about journaling. Are there any other steps that we can take to start dealing with the inside clutter?
I'm a huge fan of having gratitude because I don't think that we have, as a society all over the world, we don't really appreciate or understand how much we really have. So I think that that's really important. Developing compassion, developing empathy, I think is really important, and owning and taking responsibility for your life. I know I mentioned what others do and say is about them, and how you respond is about you. Own your life instead of blaming everyone else. That's a first huge step to take.
Yeah, so let's not gloss over that, because I think probably more so than ever we're seeing a generation of young people who want to blame everyone else except themselves, and there seems to be less and less personal responsibility taken for the afflictions that they experience in life. What do you think's brought that on, and how would you challenge somebody who maybe struggles with being the victim or not owning their own personal responsibility?
That's a great question. I think that that's true. So I would say, talk to people who love you and that you trust. I'm going to share a story. I don't remember how old I was, and my brother said to me, "You see yourself as a victim." And in that moment, I could hear it. And then I was like, wow, what does that mean? And so that got me on a journey of being curious. So I said, well, let me read some books. Let me take some classes. So if you don't have that aha moment, ask friends, do I take responsibility? And, you've got to want to change. And usually sometimes for people, they have to have that pain point where people are like, you know what, I'm done being your friend because you're just a bad friend. You never own anything. You get really tired of hearing it. I talked about a woman in my group earlier who all she does is complain, and she sees herself as a victim. Well, in this group, what started to happen is that people don't respond now. And they don't say, poor you. And they're like, I'm done giving you advice and making helpful suggestions because you don't want to listen. So I think sometimes you have to hit that pain point before you're able to move forward. And once you do that, who can you ask who you trust? Can you give me some honest feedback? Or you reach out to a professional. Like, you could talk to someone in business who, who might not be able to articulate that they see themselves as a victim. So it's about reaching that pain point, if you've noticed, wow, I am a victim, then that's when you start to read a book, listen to a podcast, do something, hire someone, and
Mm,
why is it that I feel like a victim? Where have I felt wronged, or what am I afraid of?
mm.
Because it's easy to wallow and, oh, woe is me, than to
Yeah,
take action and put yourself out there.
so true. So true. No, that's great. And you mentioned gratitude. That's another big one I think that we take for granted. You said, so often in Western society, we don't recognize how well off we really are, or how privileged we really are. I
Hmm.
in the city that I live in Brisbane, we just went into another 3-day lockdown, just to get on top of an outbreak.
Hmm.
And it was almost immediate that people started to say, oh, 2021, it's a write-off. And it's like, that was like, it's a 3-day lockdown. It's not the end of the world. And when I think about where I live, compared to what, say, some of my friends in India go through when they go
Hmm.
through a lockdown, I think we're not bad off. I mean, we've got large homes, we've got backyards we can go into.
Hmm.
It's not the same thing at all. And yet, there's this default mechanism that so many of us have, which is to complain about what we do have rather than recognizing how fortunate we are. What are some steps that we can take to start recognizing um, how fortunate we are? There's the old saying that there's always somebody that's better off than you and someone that's worse off than you. So what are some of the steps to start recognizing that? Because it's hard in a Western country that's very privileged and very
Hmm.
financially well off. Most people are, even the poor people in our society are quite well off.
Yes.
Um, how do we help ourselves become more aware of the world around us?
I'd encourage you to do it daily.
Mm,
And if you're like, man, I can't do it. I have nothing to be grateful for. Do you have enough
mm,
food to eat?
yeah.
Do you have shelter? Do you have clean water? Do you have access to health care? A lot of
Yeah.
people in Western, and thank you for correcting me that and naming specifically Western societies, almost everyone listening or watching
Mm,
has those things. So
yeah.
if that's where you begin and you commit to doing it daily, and then you can tie it in with something. You know what? While I'm showering and washing my hair, I'm going to say 3 things I'm grateful
Great.
right now. Or if I'm stuck in a traffic jam, I'm just going to start naming all the things that I am thankful for. And if you can tie it to something and make it part of your daily routine and then challenge yourself, well, I said 2 today, maybe I can say 3 tomorrow. And then
Good.
begin to look for it in every situation.
Yeah.
A good example is when we have been in lockdown, not complete lockdown. We've been in whatever they're calling it here. When that happened in March, I stopped seeing people in person
Mm,
and I lost a lot of business. But
sure.
I'm like, well, let's be honest, Julie. You keep saying that you want to not do the physical decluttering anymore. Well, here's your opportunity.
Yeah.
Look at it as on a silver platter. And so then I spent this kind of last year. What do I want to do moving forward? What do I want to build? What do I want to create? Okay, we're going to shore up our foundation. And I kept myself in gratitude as much as humanly possible. I'm not
Great.
denying that it wasn't stressful, but who do you think's going to have a better outcome if they focus on what they can be grateful for and then
Mm,
someone who doesn't and just complains? And we talked about earlier, everything's energy. Are
yeah.
you going to attract that job opportunity if you're complaining all the time?
Mm,
Hmm, maybe, but maybe not. But if you're interviewing, I bet they're going to be more attracted to the persons that, yeah, you know what, I really struggled this year, but here's the good that came out of it.
yeah. So good. And I think probably closely tied to that is what you mentioned as well, of developing compassion and empathy. Uh, Sometimes I think you can get fatigued by the victims in your world and
Hmm.
start to lose your compassion or empathy for others. How do we keep the balance? I mean, you don't want to pander to a victim, but at the same
Hmm.
time, you don't want to let that make you hard or cold or to the plight of others. So, how do we foster a sense of compassion and empathy for those people around us?
You have boundaries. I
Mm,
mentioned earlier that the guy I recognized, the crazy guy that was so angry, screaming at me on my Facebook wall. I
mm,
have no compassion. I need to take a break.
yeah.
He wasn't the one that caused me to have no compassion. It was me. And so I recognized I've got to recharge. I've got to get off Facebook. So you can have a boundary and still have compassion.
Yeah.
Just because you have empathy and compassion, that doesn't mean that you can't say, you know what, I can't do this right now.
Sure.
And say that, you know what, I love you, but I can't hear you complain right now. And I love you. And I wish that you would talk to someone. I'm really concerned. And right now, you know what, it's too much for me. I'll check back in with you. There's nothing wrong with doing that. That's
Yeah.
about your self-care. Like the sign in my kitchen says, happy wife, happy life. So you got to take care of yourself to take care of others.
Yeah, that's great. That's such good advice. Julie, do you have any other advice you'd like to share with our listeners before we start to wrap up this conversation?
Just when all else fails, stop and take a deep breath. And to remember that no matter what, you are good enough, you are worthy, and you are loved.
Great. Such good advice, Julie. Thank you so much for being on the show today. It's been a pleasure talking to you. If people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to reach out?
If they just go to reawakenyourbrilliance.com, they can find out more about me. It has links to social media, my podcast, and all that good stuff.
Awesome. And we'll link to that in the description. Julie, thanks again so much for being on the show. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you got a ton of value out of that episode. Don't forget to let us know what you thought in the comments. And if you have a topic you'd like us to cover next time, we'd love to hear from you. If you know anyone that would benefit from the content that we produce, please like and share this channel. And we look forward to having you next time on the Tarun Stevenson Leadership Channel.